Hi, I'm Alison Beckles, and you are listening to Best Fails, the podcast where we share our stories of failure, explore their impact, and reflect on what we've learned. Now, today's guest is James Hardie, whose failure sparked a transformative career transition. Now, his story is a reminder that failure can often be the gateway to new and exciting chapters. So let's get into it. Welcome, James, to Best Fails. It is very good to have you here.
Thanks.
So, I before we get into anything, I'm gonna read a little bit about you and who you are, what you are doing, what you have done, so that the audience has a good picture of who James is, and then we'll get into some real conversation, a little bit more details about who you are. So, James has spent over 30 years in aviation, beginning as a military and commercial pilot before transitioning into leadership roles focused on delivering technology solutions for the aviation industry. He has a background in both operations and strategic management, and he's now a freelance consultant working with companies to create impactful growth and resilient strategies. So, to do this, he draws on his diverse experiences, including plenty of hard lessons. And James believes that failure is a critical part of growth. He's passionate about helping people unlock their potential, whether through his consulting work, volunteer self defense teaching, or as a board member for industry and community organizations. So, this is James, and this is who is going to be sharing with us today. So, James, tell me, that's an overview of who you are. No, you're all of this. You're a consultant. You're this and the next and the third. But tell me a little bit about yourself and growing up. Like, who was little James and Charles James? How did you grow up? Like, tell me a little bit about your family and that type of stuff.
I'm the eldest of four boys. My dad was in the army, and as a family, we obviously followed him around all over the UK, really. So, my mother's from Ireland, my dad's from Scotland, and I've lived in England most of my life.
Born in England, or
Um,
you were
I
born
was
as.
born in England, yeah,
Right.
and then we moved around different parts of the country, and I think that was quite an interesting part of my childhood for a few reasons. Every couple of years, you'd be moving, you'd be in a new school, you'd be
Yeah.
making new friends and new enemies, even, and having to kind of adapt to being in um, different parts of the country.
Yeah.
You were the you were sort of sometimes you were the odd ones out because your accents were different, and that kind of happens. So I kind of I think that internationally that's also helped me in my career in adapting to different cultures whenever I've travelled to some degree, and I try to learn a little bit about a language or some of the basic words whenever I go somewhere new, just because you've got to try and fit in at least a little bit, even though you're still the odd one out. Yeah, so I think that was quite an interesting part of childhood in terms of changing schools and moving around. But I always had my three brothers around me as well, so we were we're quite close. We look out for each other. There's obviously been those argy bargies amongst ourselves. We all
Of
went
course.
to we all went to boarding school, aged 11. So I was at the Duke of York's Royal Military School from 11 to 18.
This is in
Uh,
England too, or this is. Yeah.
yeah, so it was a boarding school for at the time for sons of soldiers in the army. It eventually expanded to be co-educational and more. It's now an academy, and it's got a very wide, diverse group of people there, but it still maintains a lot of the military tradition.
Nice. So, thinking through childhood and adolescence, etc., what is your earliest memory of a failure that you've experienced?
Gosh, thinking back all the way to childhood, I think sometimes there's a bit of maybe failing to fit in, or as you moved around and learning how to do that. Just as you're coming to terms with being in a new in one place and moving to another, suddenly you're a little bit at the bottom of the pile, and that kind of um, adaptability
Mhm.
takes some time to sort of figure out as a child. And it can be, and obviously there's, you're growing older through that period. Um, I would say, one of the things that when I was at boarding school was feeling, quite displaced in my sort of second year there, really, and I kind of realised something that maybe I was trying to fit in with the wrong group for me. I didn't really I found my didn't find my own tribe for a while. I thought that everything was okay for a bit, and then it felt like it wasn't. And then realizing that you've got to figure out who your real friends are, not necessarily the people who you think you might want to be friends with, whether they're the
Yeah.
sort of celebrities of the class or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And ultimately, once you realize that about friendships, everything gets seem to get a lot easier. You focus on the friendships that are true, and you worry less about the ones that are not there for whatever reason. And funnily enough, a lot of those then develop anyway as you become this other person that's not part of their group, but they sort of respect anyway. So I think that was an interesting part of going to a boarding school. I think it made you quite tough in some ways, not necessarily always positive. Um, and a kind of like as you grew up, like being a little bit wary of people, and but also recognizing that there was always an opportunity. You have to fit in and get on with people, otherwise you're gonna you are gonna struggle at a school like that, because you're all thrown in together, and it feels like a bit of a survival thing at first.
So I've got a game for us to play. And this was a game recommended by you, and I absolutely love the question, so I'm gonna use it with our conversation. So it's fast friends, but this is how we're gonna do it. We've got questions 1 to 24, and we're going to do 3 questions. So you got to choose numbers between 1 to 24, and whichever number you choose is the questions that we will do. So what will happen is that you'll tell me the number, I'll read the question, and then we'll both answer each question. So numbers 1 to 24. What will be your first number, James?
Number two.
Number 2. Would you like to be famous, and in what way?
I wouldn't mind being famous,
Mm-hmm.
actually. Um, I'd like to be famous for something that I've managed to achieve that's helped other people, perhaps, rather than fame in its own right. I don't mind being on a stage. I quite like it. I try and lean into that when I'm presenting. I try not to be nervous. I try and sort of change it into like being excited and that sort of thing. So yeah, I wouldn't mind being famous as long as it was for positive reasons. I
Yeah.
wouldn't want to be famous for something terrible.
Oh, for
I
sure.
know some people don't mind. I know they don't mind, but I wouldn't mind.
I remember as a little girl, I was in love with Whitney Houston, and I was convinced that I was going to be the next Whitney Houston. So I would say, as a child, I wanted to be a famous singer. In my adulthood, though, similar to you, if I was going to be famous, and I don't particularly want fame, I would want to be famous for something that I have created, whether or not it is, a book, something that has been really helpful to people, and that they can use across a variety of settings. So I don't want fame, like I don't want to be any kind of body star of anything. Just I don't want that type of fame at all. I want fame for something that I have produced and created in this world. So yes. So next question. So we've done 2. So what is your next number?
I'll go for seven. Let's do
7.
seven.
So, number 7 is, do you have a secret hunch about how you will die?
A secret hunch of how I
About how
will,
you will die. Yes. Do you have a secret feeling
how
about how
I'll
you will
die.
die?
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah. So let's think. I guess I sort of think I might. I think it might be a little bit like, oh, it's now.
It surprises you. It comes upon you suddenly.
like a little bit of a surprise, and then I'll try and remember to take notice.
Yes. I like that. A hunch. I can't say that I have a hunch, but I would like to date like my grandmother. Like my granny, from the perspective of her, like on the day that she died, my mom was staying with her because she had a little bit of dementia. I don't want none of that. None of that is what I want. Just the experience that she seemed to have had. So my mother was saying that she'd gotten up the morning, and this was the last day of the year, 2012, last day of the year. She got up and she heard Granny in the background just singing, and she was just, whispering and singing to herself. So she was like, oh, well, I guess she's having a good morning. So she went out and she made like a cup of tea and that type of stuff to get breakfast ready for her. And she called her and didn't hear anything. And when she went inside, my grandmother has died. And she died, and my mother was a little bit like confused because she has the memory of her just singing, singing in the background. So if I was gonna die, I would like to die like that, because it feels joyful, it feels peaceful. So that isn't really a hunch, but it's a preference.
It'd be nice if there's a few unironed shirts hanging around that didn't waste any.
Yes. So final question: what is your number going to be?
Oh, let's go for let's try 24.
No, let's see what 24 says. So, this is an interesting one. How do you feel about your relationship with your mother?
Well, so my mother died a few years ago,
Right?
and I remember we always we got on, and then we also didn't get on at times. So we were in opposition about a few things, but we
Yeah.
were in many ways we were very similar. So I think that I I feel about it quite positively in terms of I learned a lot from her. I think one of the phrases that I use that she taught me was about yes is a promise, and and so it was kind of like it would either be about tidying my room or something like that, which I'd maybe said yes, I will, and then I didn't. So she sort of, but that sort of phrase stuck with me, and in some ways it stuck with me in a way that I'm careful about what I commit to, because I feel that if I make a commitment, then I'm kind of obligated. I am obligated to do it. So careful about what you commit to. Make sure you can do it, and I think my mum bringing up four boys with my dad often away, with the army in those things. She had to deal with us arguing with her, all sorts of things, and challenging her, and she stood her ground, and I learned a lot from her.
I love that. She stood her ground against four boys. I like that. Um, how do I feel about my relationship with my mother? I think people who knew me and grew up with me would probably call me a daddy's girl because I very much am a daddy's girl. But I feel like I'm also very much a mummy's girl as well. Like my mother and I are very close, very easy. She's always very. My mother's the is such a caring person. So like when my grandmother started to get ill, she stopped working so that she would be able to stay home and take care of her. And then it did not end with my grandmother. When my grandmother died, then my aunt, I had an aunt who had got older, and then so there was a list of maybe four or so people that she took care of just by choosing. That's the type of personality she has, and I think that's the experience that I would have had as a child with her as well. So she wasn't necessarily, because when it came to like sicknesses and maybe cuts and bruises and so forth, my father was the nurse. Like my father dealt with all of that. Like, if we needed to get like some Vicks rubbed on our chest or whatever, daddy was the person for that. My mother did not like blood. She didn't like anything like that. But I remember her saying, she was telling somebody, when I became a teenager, that she realized that she had to grow with me. She couldn't be the same Asita, because that's her name. She couldn't be the same Asita that she was when I was a little girl. She had to grow with me, and I feel as if that is what she has been doing. So she's not a perfect woman, but I feel as if she has been growing with me at, in turn, responding to what I needed from her, even as an adult, what I need from her at the point in time. So, Mommy Race, if you hear this, so you would know that I am a mummy's girl.
Yeah, it's an
Oh,
interesting thing that when you say about growing with you and everything. That reminds me of like that boarding school thing where you'd go away for 3 months and come back 3 months older, and
yes.
that wasn't always acknowledged. You'd grown up a little
Ah,
bit more, and then
yeah.
it was in chunks of grow. And as a teenager, with all the other stuff that's going on with teenagers, that was definitely a sort of point of friction, if you like,
And I could
with
imagine.
parents and with your your siblings who because you're always growing at a different pace to each other. You're outgrowing them, they're catching up, then you're all grown up.
Yeah, that's
You're
interesting
learning
because
to be.
actually that is quite interesting because they would be responding to you as you were the last time that they remembered you, so they missed a whole bunch and they'll have to kind of figure out, wait, so who's this new James? Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah,
Yeah, we'd usually last about 4 days before there was a big
catch up. Oh, a big blowout.
a big blowout argument about
Yes,
something.
understood. So now we're gonna get into the meat of the matter, the reason for why we are here, which is you sharing a little bit about your best fail story. So I'm gonna turn over to you to kind of talk about it, and then we'll get into discussing it and and that type of stuff. So over to you, James.
Okay, so here we go. So as was said earlier, I was in the Air Force as a pilot in the military. So there came this point where I was sat in this little room, and I knew that everything was about to change
Hmm.
because I basically failed for the third time of asking an important test, a particular stage of training, and I knew the examiner was about to come in. I thought it was incredibly unlikely that I was going to get a pass from it, which meant that that was going to be the end of my flying career in the Air Force.
Right.
And I just had that moment of thinking, uh, well, this doesn't come along very often, so I better pay attention. But I wasn't really interested in paying attention to necessarily what he had to say about how the trip had gone. I felt that like most of that was already been dealt with. But I was sort of just I wanted to just create a moment and be aware that that was I was in a pivotal point in life where from here on a certain path was now going to be closed and other options were going to have to be considered that I hadn't really I'd spent so long up to that point trying to be somewhat successful as a pilot in the Royal Air Force, and I had been to a degree. I'd got through a number of courses that were even at the same level as that particular one, and I'd even got further. I'd got my wings, and I'd gone out to Northern Ireland, served as a helicopter pilot, but I'd also failed there. So I'd failed to make my what's called combat ready check. So that's the point where you're a captain of the aircraft. You can operate it in on with other people as part of a crew, and I failed to make that check, and then I'd been restreamed into another group, which was the multi-engineer, where I then failed again. So I was at a pivotal sort of like, oh, okay, I'm not going to be a pilot in the Air Force anymore. I've spent so many years like from people going, what are you going to do when you grow up? Um, Applying, going through the selection and assessment program, being awarded a nice university bursary sponsored through university, going through all the flying training, managing to survive numerous what we used to call chop rides, if you like. Sometimes it felt like every trip was a chop ride. So,
Right.
and
What's the
finally,
chop?
this
What's the chop rate?
a chop ride is like it felt like the axe is going to fall. That's the end of it. We used to
Ah,
call it a chop ride. So the
yeah.
axe is going to fall, and you're going to be you're going to be out, and there was always that threat overhanging every student in flying training, certainly through the 90s and well before that. If you read some of the books, like Jeffrey Wellham's book, for example, it didn't change from 1939 even, in some ways. So that was sudden, after all those worries and going through that anxiety for so many years, that suddenly was done and it was over, and it was quite an interesting. I thought it was going to be, I remember just consciously trying to look at that moment in that small room and taking a look around and thinking, okay, well, everything changes from here, and then you've got to go and tell people. Like, I had to go and tell my wife, to she was still serving as well, and like, what does it mean? And I hadn't figured any of that out because she didn't really know there was a possibility to stay in, or ultimately I decided to leave and exit the Royal Air Force. So, um, and that was interesting. So when you make that decision, I was quite surprised how that went, because you suddenly decided to leave the club, and there's your friends, and then there's everyone else that you're friendly with, who somewhat, you know you've left, you're leaving, you're no longer one of that group. So your identity immediately starts to change into and transition into this different person who's leaving. And another thing happened as well, by failing that point in the course. Um, there's always been, I think, and I've probably done it myself as well, where there's a sort of distancing. Like, someone's failing, you can try and help them, but it's a very individualistic element to going through flying training, which is, for all sorts of good reasons. They're also trying to recruit people with single seat fast jet pilots and that sort of thing. Um, and then there was always a feeling, I think, that people thought maybe you would catch it, if so you suddenly feel incredibly lonely, and you don't, you don't want to sort of infect everyone else with what's happened to you. You want them to keep positive, and your journey is over. It seems, except it's not. Life's journey doesn't end like that. So, um, yeah, so that was a critical sort of point of failure in my the career that I'd chosen, that I'd gone through the most rigorous selection and assessments, that even to just get in, whether it's medical or aptitude, intelligence, all of those kind of things. And then there you are, you bumped along, like most people do. They have good days and bad, and then suddenly it's all over. And it was very unique as well, because of my time spent flying in Northern Ireland, which I did about 600 hours on helicopters. 400 hours of that was in that period. Um, that I was quite an experienced pilot with over 1,000 hours flying, and that also caused a sort of ripple, and how people reacted to you.
How so? What about it would cause the ripple?
I think there was a lot of, at different times, there was a lot of opinions about why it happened, whether it was correct, not necessarily, whatever I might have thought at the time. Other people had their own opinions about, how could some of them were like, how could this have happened and gone on for so long? Shouldn't they have caught it earlier? So there was some elements of, let's question the training system,
Right.
which, it had its problems at the time.
Yeah.
Um, and then there was like, but also let's question the individual, which was me, and what was my role in my own downfall. And and I have to take some responsibility for those things at that time. And I think if I didn't take some responsibility for them, then I would have just eternally been blaming other people. And I definitely, I look back and kind of go, I could have done better at certain aspects. It might have still ended up with the same outcome, um, for whatever reason, but there were. there were times when I probably could and should have done better, um, and I didn't.
Right. That's interesting. And I didn't. It almost sounds like an implication of choice from that perspective, as in terms of some intentionality.
I would say that I would say that I made some bad choices
Okay.
around aspects of that, and one of the things would be that I would sort of look at would be um, there's a lot of socializing. There's a lot of alcohol related socializing in the military, especially in the 90s. It was still there. It's changed in flying training since then, and that might have been a part of an issue. So you're kind of like you're leaning on these things in the evening, having a few beers after work or whatever, and maybe having more than you should, and so you're not doing yourself any favor. You're not putting yourself in the best position for success in some ways. So that would be certainly one part of it that I would say that was I look at and go, okay, and it took me a long time to even sort of decide that shouldn't be the case as well. So so that's one of the areas.
Yeah. 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 How many years were you in the Air Force by the time this situation happened?
So, well, I joined as a reserve for the University Air Squadron in 1990, and I left in 2000. But 3 years of that was university, and then 7 years um, sort of in the regulars. So quite a long period of time, and I got my wings um, 1996, I think, if I recall. And and we had an extended flying training period where we were doing in between flying training courses, we were doing lots of different other jobs. It was called holding. It still takes a long time to get through flying training, and that was fun, but also quite a waste of talent as well. In the people in their 20s not necessarily pushed being pushed whilst they're on the courses, but then having a lot of slack when they're not on the courses.
Yeah. 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 You said something quite interesting when you were talking about just the experience of basically living with the threat of failure. So I can't remember what was the term, but I asked you what it was, and it has completely
Chop
slipped
right,
me. Say
being
it again.
chopped, being
Yes,
chopped.
being chopped. Yes, and tell me a little bit about how that experience was in terms of maybe mindsets, not just for you, but if you could even see like how it may have been impacting the others that were there.
So one of the things is you go through on a course with about maybe 6 to 8 other people, and your each course might be between 70 and 120 hours of flying training. That's actually sitting in the cockpit and flying with an instructor or with others, or with yourself. Sorry. Um, so it's either solo flights or with others, depending on what the course was. And in all of those things, there's like a there's a sort of training, learning part of it, and then there's reaching the standard. And all the time, you're kind of reaching a standard to progress. You can fail any particular trip and have to redo it if the instructor thinks he was unhappy with your performance. Um, and you have specific like real sort of waypoints where there's a little bit less. There's a particular test that you might have to do, like a instrument rating test or a handling test or aerobatics or something like
Yeah,
that. And so you just and meanwhile there's people falling along the way. So
yeah.
the first day you even go to join the Air Force, you go to Officer Aircrew Selection Centre, and by lunchtime half the people were gone.
Wow. I can't imagine that sounds stressful.
And that was for medical reasons typically.
Oh,
Um,
really?
you'd gone and done your aptitude test in the morning, but you didn't get your results till later.
Oh, right. Okay.
You did your medical, and then people were kicked out as a result of the medical, and
Yeah.
then you kind of got through. So you're like, wow, I must be like pretty super.
Yeah.
You kind of look at it like that. Well, I'm through, and I must be pretty fantastic. So that's good, isn't it? And then you go, and all your doubts are still there. different people have different doubts. So some that just seem to have none, and they're amazing.
Are good at
Um,
masking
or
it.
there's others that seem to have lots of doubts, but were just doing amazingly well, and
Right.
you wondered why they were doubting themselves, and
So,
you were sort of
yeah.
like, you're getting A's every single time, and you're worried, and I remember those people as well,
Yeah.
and and seeing people who seem to be exceptional at one stage, then they just plateau, they'd struggle, and maybe they'd end up in a different track, because
Yeah.
there was basically three streams of you're either going to go fast jets, rotary, or multi-engine
So,
transport.
which one were you? Which one of those streams were you in?
Well, so at one point we were all in the fast jet stream, but there were no slots to go to the fast jet training centre at RF Valley, and then there was we all got nearly everybody got sent to helicopters, so off we went to helicopters, and I think one or two went at that point. But we'd all had to pass this same benchmark, which was the fast jet entry standard. That was just one of their ways of filtering out another
Set
bunch
of
of
people.
people. We don't need everybody. So
Wow.
it's pretty ruthless in a lot of ways. It's pretty ruthless, and you kind of like lean into that a little bit, like, well, it must be necessary. But at times, I think there are sort of, from what I hear, there's a slightly better, or improving approaches occurring now into sort of like providing more support and getting people uh, thinking more positively. But I felt like a lot of the time, depending on which instructors you had, some were very supportive and very good at it. They maybe had their own bit of spare capacity that they could help students a bit more effectively. Some instructors probably were just struggling with being able to instruct at that level as well. So that can be a challenge, and you've got all of that going on, and then you've got all the individuals, and so it's a very complicated environment in many ways with all the normal human elements in it. Just because you've got through a selection process doesn't make you superhuman.
Yes. Yeah. Very true. Although that because of the way that it is done, it might give you the idea or thoughts in your head, well, I might be better, which is a whole bunch of stuff to struggle with too. Did you feel a sense of relief? Because I know you were talking about living under this threat of failure. Did you feel a relief?
Yeah, I think so, because it had already, in some ways, the bigger one was the previous one with the combat ready check, and that was much more. I mean, that was a much more difficult one. I was put on review, and I was basically on review for 5 weeks, and I was told if I failed any trip whatsoever, then that would be the end of that. But I managed to get all the way through the 5 weeks, and it had to be 5 weeks because I was about to get married, and he said, "Yeah, it'll be over before you're married, one way or another." My boss at the time, and I got all the way through to the event. So I was recommended combat ready by the guy that I was flying with, which meant I went forward to fly with the standards officer, and then I failed that. So that was a big one. And then I had to get restreamed. I had to apply to be restreamed, which I was, and so I was thinking, okay, great, I'm off to do multi engines. That should be fine. Fine. I've done another course to a similar level before. I should be all right. And I felt like I was going to be fine. And then when it started to go wrong, it was a bit more like, oh, here we go again. And then finally, that ending, I was like, you know what? That's kind of done. Well, okay, you found me
Almost
out.
like living on edge.
It's taken you 1,000 hours to find me out, but you found me out. Well
You probably, oh, that's interesting. That's interesting, James. That statement is taking you 1,000 hours to find me out, but you found me out. Wow, tell me about that. What does that mean?
I think it means that a lot of people that attempt to do something that's quite challenging and difficult, they're never quite sure that they
Yeah,
can do it. But I do talk to people about the idea that there's all these stories out there like aim high and you'll fail high, and I think that is important. You should be looking to reach beyond your grasp, and you'll find that you're grasping well beyond what other people reach for. So it doesn't matter that um, is a point of failure in a lot of ways.
It is a area of growth in terms of trying to get higher. And so I want you to talk a little bit about this contagion, this failure. I calling it failure contagion. You know, like, like that the experience of people not wanting to necessarily be close to others who might have been failing, like from your perspective in terms of you seeing others failing, and what was that like in your mind, and what did you want to remove yourself away from, and then your own experience of having experienced the failure then, and then how people reacted to you.
Yeah, so I think that maybe as you observed other people struggling with things, you either saw a lot of similarities and wondered where it was coming from, and like, what did that mean for you then?
Mm-hmm.
Or there could be, so is there anything I can learn from what they've done wrong? Can I identify what they've done wrong? But you've not flown with them. You don't know what happened. You know them. You might think it's because of this thing or another, or they haven't got the right stuff, or the right attitude, or some other attribution that you come up with. But in all probability, they have, and um, they may have been a little bit unlucky. They've lost their confidence. There was a lot of
Mm.
talk. There was often a lot of talk. You'd sometimes be almost in the same day, two different trips with two different instructors. You'd be told you're overconfident, you're
Okay.
underconfident.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You're like,
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
win.
Yeah. Like, what does
You're like,
confidence mean for you? Like, come on. Like, what do you mean?
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like there was you're there. I mean, this is a long time ago now.
I know.
You're asking me about stuff from a long time ago. And some of it I guess I'm also, I think this is another thing, it's like I'm still framing it in my own different ways at different times. Every time you tell the story it's slightly different. There's a modification, there's an understanding, there's a little insight of like, oh, I hadn't really thought about it like that, maybe it was that. And you're still trying to come to terms with it in your own way, but there's literally not very much you can't do anything about it, and I wouldn't go back and change it anymore. So there was a, in the moments after it, momentarily after it, I would have done anything to, I would have happily gone and changed it. I'd have gone round, I would have stayed on and done another test, and I wanted to stay in. So those things, that would have but as you go further away from it, your life changes, and other things have happened, and suddenly your family life is different, and you wouldn't go back. You're like, well, here I am now, and what would I change? If I change anything back there, it could
It's
change
gonna
everything
change.
this way. so
Yeah. Yeah.
so am I happy where I am?
Yeah.
Was that the crucial failing point? And that I think a lot of people perhaps dwell on that. I try not to look back with too many regrets. Not regrets in terms of like, I wish I'd done something different. I think what you've got to sort of go is, well, if I've got any regrets, what I've got to do is not wish I'd done something different. I've got to do something different as I move forward. I've got to learn from that period, and as I move forward with my own life, and help others in their, what they're doing, it's like, put that behind you, learn from it, but remember it's behind you now.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Can't dwell on that past. You can keep looking and reflecting back on it, but it's got to be in a positive way that allows you to move forward into the future. What did you learn from it that helps you get to where you want to go to now?
Yeah.
That's the bit I think is important.
Yeah, yeah. I know that over the, those 7 years that you would have been flying, because 7 years is a long time. That's not like, I mean, it's a short time, but while you're doing it, it's a very much a long time, and you are very much, you are immersed completely in being a pilot, and seeing your future and building a future in your mind that has this that has or sees yourself as a pilot. So when you had that failure, how did you kind of reconcile your identity as a pilot, or how did you reconcile your identity?
Right. So the first thing I probably did was I maybe I didn't. Um, so I decided I had a choice. So I could, it was that point of like, do I stay in the Air Force as a Royal Air Force officer and take a different path, a different track, a different role, a job? Um, and I looked at a few, and then I decided, no, I'm going to leave, and I'm going to go and do my own civilian licenses. So I left and I started doing that, and then that involved initially there's all this. At the time, it was a fairly complicated process for. You could take your flying hours; you don't lose those. But I had to go almost back to the beginning of ground school and pass a load of tests for the Civil Aviation Authority. There was a fairly robust, fast way of doing that for experienced people. So I went and did this intensive course of 4 weeks at a ground school in Bristol, and lots of people had done that quite successfully. And I was on that course, and I do remember 2 or 3 weeks into it, and my wife sort of observing, "You're working hard. Maybe if
Hmm.
you'd worked this hard when
Oh,
you'll be in." And I
oh,
was thinking,
she was
thinking,
just throwing those
I
little
think you're right.
bombs.
I was thinking, yeah,
Wow.
I think you're right. Maybe I didn't work as hard as I should have. And now this is, if I'm gonna, I've already had a few chances. I've used up a few of my lives on this, and now it's actually costing us money. I'm paying for it. I don't have a job. I'm paying for it. We're paying for it out of our savings, mostly her savings, as it. And she's the one still earning, and
Yeah.
she was still in the Air Force. She was a nursing officer at the time, and she's a nurse now. Um, the So that was like on my mind. So I kind of fully threw myself into that. It was interesting because it was on that same course. There were lots of people who left after glittering careers. Very experienced people. We all got on fine. Nobody seemed bothered that about what they
Because
were a bit.
that's the question that was on my mind. Was there, did people feel or see a difference between, if you are a pilot in the Air Force and then you come over to the commercial? Was that seen as maybe as a downgrade or anything like that?
No, I wouldn't say it was. No, not
Yeah.
as a downgrade, but different. And the fact that people with a great deal of experience still had to go through this same process to kind of, and there was, I think a lot of people thought they shouldn't have to, and that may be true, or some parts of it might be true. It could be done better, but we did all learn quite a lot, and then it went on to, so having passed all the ground school elements. And then it started to get really expensive. Then that was a few £1,000s to pay to do that course and then do all
Yeah.
the exams. And then it starts getting very expensive. You're starting to spend hundreds of pounds an hour for every time you go flying, and you still have to get through a number of other flying things. So yeah. So anyway, went through that, and then having got passed all those flying tests, got a commercial license, my blue book in my hand, and I go off to 9/11 happened, and the world changed for aviation at that moment. For a period of time, there was a lot of layoffs in the airline industry. There wasn't going to be any new jobs for even fairly experienced pilots and that. Um, so I ended up getting a different job, but it was in an aviation company. So that was that's where things started. The route actually started to change then, and the job I had put me in the cockpits doing all this flight monitoring, and I saw the airline business and being a pilot in an airliner as maybe not the job I wanted to do.
All right. Okay.
So
So,
even when the lift happened, where people started recruiting again within about a year and a half or so, um, I started current license and everything, and I just found I wasn't really interested in applying for those jobs. I was quite
yeah.
interested in doing the work that I was doing, which was more in operations, communications, working with other people, coming up with solutions, and having been a pilot was very useful for credibility. I'd kind of managed to alleviate the failure by having some post military success in terms of going and doing another course and passing that training, and that wasn't an easy, commercial pilot license and instrument rating and all that. They're all quite hard tests. They're as hard as anything that I've flown before. So and they're expensive. So but passing that kind of put you in a strong position that you feel, okay, I've put that behind me. And so in a way, that was what allowed me to put things behind me, was making it more about my decision than their decision helped. But it's an expensive way of helping yourself.
Of helping, because my next question to you was gonna be like, what were the things that you did that helped to build resilience within this situation? So one of them, based on what you said, is reframing it as in are in charge of the decisions that you're making about your career and so forth. But what were some of the other things that were helpful in helping you to navigate this very sudden change that you'd experienced?
Well, definitely say, the support of my wife was really important. The fact that my real friends weren't, they weren't as bothered about it as I was. That's the thing. I think that when it comes to failure, we're sort of like, we internalize it. We're very harsh judges and critics of ourselves, if we're honest. Um, and and other people, it's not that they don't care, but they don't care as much as you care about it in some ways. They're kind of like, and yet they would have the same problem for themselves. So it's much easier to help someone else and tell them it's okay than it is to sort of help yourself and tell yourself it's okay. Because I think you're aware of all the things that you did, um, rightly or wrongly. You're aware of things that nobody else knows about, what your attitude was, whether you actually tried hard and stuff like that. So you're kind of giving yourself a bit of a guilt trip in some ways, and maybe you need to, um, so that you can say, well, I don't like that feeling, I don't like the guilt, whatever it is, and maybe I can learn that I didn't like that, but I learned that I actually did have the brains to work a bit hard. I did have the resilience to work a bit harder. So maybe I could I could focus myself. I could take away some of the distractions that weren't actually helping me, um, and try and use that as your learning point and that helps you to be resilient and bounce back.
Yeah, because I tell you, if it was that I had gone through flight training school, like you were saying, it is so difficult. I would, in my head, I'd be thinking, well, there's a lot of things that I probably could do pretty easily. Well, maybe not pretty easily, but I know that I'd be pretty certain they can get it done if I was able to get that far.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could. That's probably true,
Yeah,
and it's a good, in that respect. I always say to people, if they're sort of thinking about whatever it is that you're thinking about doing, especially in your 20s, when you're a brand new grown up adult, anything that stretches you and you're not sure whether you can do it. The only way to find out is to try,
yeah,
and make sure that you try hard.
yeah. I like that. Try hard. Give it your all.
Don't just use failure as your only learning point. Oh well,
Yeah.
I failed, and I'll learn from my mistakes. It's like, try and learn from other people's mistakes,
For
because
sure, which I hope is the point of this entire podcast series. Like, learn from the mistakes that are being talked about here.
learn from
Yeah,
everybody else's too. And
yeah,
the opportunity for that now, with the amount of information that there is out there, the access to books, which, whether it's electronically, the internet, to artificial intelligence sources that have read all the books, and if you ask the right questions, you can learn, and people's ability to communicate with each other. So doing an event like this, um, helps. If it helps, it's an hour of our time, say, and if it helps two or three people, it could be,
life changing because you don't
change
know who those.
hours,
Yeah,
or in some
exactly,
years of their lives, and that would be
exactly.
nice to think. So, for the sake of spending some time
Yeah,
talking about it, if it helps someone else,
yeah.
I'd be pleased about that.
Do you approach things in your life differently? No, because of that experience that you had?
I don't know. Uh, I don't know. I don't know what I would, who I might. I guess I think that people don't change so much as in terms of their personality, but I think that as you grow with experience, you become, and if you learn to be self aware and reflecting, know yourself more, as much spend as much time trying to figure out and know yourself as you do looking and observing and thinking about what other people are doing and whether they're right or wrong. um, and that might be useful in terms of, I've had what I considered quite a big failure. Other people might not consider it like that, but that was as a critical point in time. It was something I'd invested a lot of time and effort in, and then what do I take from it? Well, I achieved a lot more than I ever thought I would. I think right from the beginning, I thought I was going to be found out, like every single course. You know, it was hard. So then you started to think, oh, maybe I'm all right. Maybe I'm okay now. Um, and then ultimately, I was, and I can fly an aeroplane, and I can fly a helicopter, and I can point them, and I'd say in a lot of ways that I was actually as okay at it. Um, at that point in time, I wasn't. So I've got to lean into the next things that I'm doing and understand that other people are going to be going through their own difficulties at different times. And it's like, how can you help? Whether it's the people on your team or whether it's the customer that you're working with, helping them solve the problems that they've got. I try and get people to think about problems like, how do we make this our problem so that it becomes something that's more of a team effort. I'm very aware of that when we are acting as individuals, and I've done like all these survival courses. I like watching these survival programs. But if you've ever noticed, the people that are surviving on their own, they are waiting to be rescued,
Oh, for sure.
and 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 there isn't anybody coming to rescue you.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
you've got to
yeah.
go and find some other people to help you, and you help them, and
Yes.
that's how we self rescue. We don't rescue
But
ourselves
yeah,
individually.
yeah.
We rescue each other by supporting each other,
I
and
love
that's what I
that.
think is important. When we
Yeah.
find the tribe or the team or the
Group
potentially a
of whatever.
customer
Yeah.
that you're going to work with and help, you found them and they found you, and you're helping each other, and that's where it all starts to happen. And that's where,
Yeah.
if you go back to your first question, like, about families, the sort of the standard unit of people, if you've got a family around you, that's an incredibly strong start for people to have. And then from that they can grow friendships and other relationships around their life. But it for most of us, it starts with a good, strong family foundation. If that isn't there, then we've got to figure out a way to help people through that, so that they discover that they have got other people around them. I guess that's another thing about the military. There's an element of, come and join our group. This is how we do things. This is these are what our ethics are, our values, beliefs, and behaviours, and all of those things. And if that suits you, then come and join. And some of it's true, and some of it's not necessarily as true as you
Some
thought it
of it
was.
is aspirational.
Some of it's for a time. It suits
Yeah.
you for a time, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
you've had enough, and so you leave.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I left at the right time for me.
Who is one person that you would like to shout out in terms of the importance of their support for you during that period of time? Who would be your unsung hero?
Well, I mean, my wife Linda, I'd say, is absolutely the number one. Who I
Yes.
met her when we were, I was going through the Takana course at Linson News, and she was very, supportive of me. so that, and that carried on, and obviously we got married and
Yes.
still married. That's great. Gosh, isn't that the obvious one? My wife. I would say there was one particular instructor in my time that it was his first. I was one of his first students. So he was at the time he was a new instructor, but he was a very experienced and capable pilot, and he'd flown helicopters in the Navy and Sea Harriers. This guy called Dave Ritchie. He's still an instructor. He's a civilian flying training
Yeah.
instructor for the Air Force and the Navy at the moment. But he was really good. So he was one of the best for sort of supporting students through that. And I think perhaps because he had a bit of spare capacity to do it, but he also had faced his own challenges when he was going through. And he was good at encouraging um, me at the time, like when you'd done things well, he noticed and told you what was good, and when you'd done things badly, he helped you to figure out how to improve. So I think that he had a very good instructional technique and capacity for teaching people,
Yeah.
which seemed to be about noticing what
Mm-hmm.
was good and encouraging that. Others struggled with it, and they were on you about something or other all the time. They made if they I mean, you might think about it in a modern workplace. We talk about like micromanaging, and the person that's on your shoulder telling you, "Have you checked this yet? Have you checked that yet?" It means that you can't ever go through your checklist because they're continually going through their checklist, and it might not even be the standardized checklist that you're supposed to be following. So they're always, and I felt that that was a good learning point, if you like. For I can't say I'm not perfect, but um, I I I would try to sort of take the sort of step back, take more of the strategic big picture, and look at the person in the round, and try and help them with what they're good at, and iron out some of the other kinks on at the different times.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So thanks, Dave.
So, what final words would you give to somebody who has experienced or is experiencing, a career failure like what you would have experienced? Is there something that you would want to tell them?
Yeah, so I kind of got to the with all the other things that I do now, and take taking a little bit more care of myself, sort of well-being stuff. Um, and I think, like, thinking about the course we did together, like the last module that we did was the work and well-being course, and that had always sat with me as something important. And I was kind of looking at all the other parts of the course and wondering, like, these don't seem to fit unless you've got that bit right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important that we talk. You might have heard the sort of phrase being healthy, wealthy, and wise.
Yeah.
And like, if you think about, like, what are the measures of being healthy for you,
Yeah.
what does that mean? In sort of like healthy body, healthy soul,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of thing. That you're doing the right things the right way. You're looking after yourself so that you can enjoy life to the full. Um, Wealthy, well, that some might see that as like wealthy in terms of money, but I'd also say it's like wealthy in terms of resources around you, whatever those resources might be. So money might be one of the resources, but the people that the relationships you've got, and having a good sense of what your spirit and like purpose is, and that sort of thing. And then thinking about whys, be this idea of failures help to teach you. They're a certain form of knowledge. Nobody goes out, starts the day thinking, I'm going to fail at this, and and that's good. They're trying to succeed. Their acceptance that failure might be part of the journey towards success is important, and it's having that. You can build up your wisdom so that you start to see. you're just much more likely to be successful because you've got an acknowledgement that failure may exist. It helps you to plan for it or do the planning. So I like to say on that is, it's important that we do the planning to be successful as best we
Mm-hmm.
can, but it's the planning that helps you look for the areas that are going to potentially trip you up. And when those trip ups inevitably happen to one degree or another, it's your planning. It's not the plan that you had that's now going to be working because the plan's starting to fail. But it's the planning you've done before that allows you to adapt and achieve. So you've got to anticipate failure, plan for it to some degree, not
You can't
roll
fully
around
plan for
in
because you
fear.
don't know everything, but at least planning some space for adaptability.
Yeah, but look towards the further horizon away is success.
Yeah,
That's what we're all after. We're
yeah,
not seeking out failure. Oh, well, that's great. I'm going to go and fail at this, and I'll have learned something. And
yeah,
like, we actually want success in the
yeah,
end. Don't let's not forget that. But it's a bumpy road sometimes to success, and
yeah,
that's it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes. James, thank you very much. This was great. Thank you, thank you, thank you. James, thank you so very much for sharing your story with us. If you want to connect with James and find out more about his work, check out our show notes for details. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to support us, tell a friend or leave a review on your favorite podcast app. You can also follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube at Best Feels Podcast. If you have your own Best Feels story that you would like to share, send us an email at info@mybestfeels.com. Have you had a similar experience to James? I would love to hear about it. What was your major takeaway from the experience? Write us a note or record a voice memo and send it to us at info@mybestfeels.com. And we just might play it on a future episode. If you are navigating or processing a failure and would like a safe space to reflect and explore what it means for you, visit our show notes to book some time with me. And remember, shame dies when stories are told in safe places. Until next time.